Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's compilation video, we will revisit the files of 6 shocking cases where violence and tragedy cast a dark shadow over the Vietnamese community in the United States. From an explosive act of rage following the loss of a loved one in California, to the loneliness that led to a deadly shooting on New Year's Eve in Monterey Park, and even the disturbing paranoia that unfolded inside an English learning center in New York. We will also look back at bloody revenge plots between gangs in San Jose, triggered simply by someone wearing the wrong color, as well as the heartbreaking stories of hardworking individuals who lost their lives inside their own shops due to ruthless criminals. Each case stands as a grim reminder of the hidden struggles within immigrant life where hatred, despair, and blind ambition have shattered countless families. Join us as we dive deeper into the details to uncover the truth behind these fatal gunshots. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese Case Files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the afternoon of July 20th, 2019, a resident of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was driving past Steelman grocery when they suddenly heard several loud explosions. Stepping inside, the person was stunned by the chaotic scene, merchandise scattered across the floor and shattered display cases. Behind the cashier counter lay a middle-aged woman, motionless. The witness immediately shouted for help and called 911. When the first investigators arrived, they were horrified by the tragic scene inside the store. The victim, a woman in her late 50s, was found collapsed behind the cashier counter. Preliminary examination indicated that she had been shot at close range. Electrical wires and debris were scattered across the countertop, suggesting that the perpetrator had violently ripped away the cash register before fleeing. Bullet holes scattered across the wall indicated that the gunman had not only targeted the female store owner, but had also fired toward others. Tragically, a customer standing at the counter was struck multiple times. Although severely injured and rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, fortunately, the individual survived the critical condition. Initial assessments by investigators indicated that this was an extremely brazen armed robbery. At the scene, authorities documented several crucial pieces of evidence, including spent shell casings scattered across the floor and tire tracks imprinted in the dirt outside the entrance. Notably, a detached car wheel cover found near the doorway drew particular attention from the police, as it was likely part of the vehicle the suspects used to flee. Based on witness statements, police quickly identified the victim as Lisa Nguyen, the owner of Steelman Grocery. Born in 1960, Lisa Nguyen was a Vietnamese-born woman whose life had seen many hardships, yet was marked by remarkable resilience. At the age of 15, she immigrated to the United States with her family, beginning the journey of building a new life in a foreign land. Initially, the family settled in California, where there was a sizable Vietnamese community. Though her early years abroad were far from easy, Lisa Nguyen was always remembered as a strong and hardworking woman who did her utmost to help support her family. Later, her family moved to Louisiana, a southern state with a culture that felt somewhat familiar. There, she met and married James Nguyen, a gentle and humble man. The couple shared many happy years raising their children. In 2015, when she was already in her mid-50s, Lisa Nguyen and her husband decided to relocate to Hattiesburg, Mississippi to start anew. In the eyes of her husband and children, Lisa Nguyen was a wonderful wife and mother who always sacrificed everything for her family. Her sudden passing was an overwhelming shock, leaving an irreplaceable void in the hearts of those she left behind. Although she had only lived in Hattiesburg for a few years, Lisa Nguyen had become a cherished member of the local community. She and her husband opened Steelman Grocery to provide daily necessities to neighborhood residents, and everyone spoke of her with affection and respect. A kind-hearted, devoted woman who was always willing to help others was now gone, leaving the community heartbroken and outraged by the brutality of the crime. Immediately after confirming the victim's identity, the task force led by the Hattiesburg Police Department swiftly launched an intensive investigation. The initial assessment was relatively clear. This was an audacious case of armed robbery and murder. From witness testimonies, investigators speculated that approximately 3 individuals were directly involved. They had covered their faces and carried at least one handgun. The entire crime unfolded extremely quickly, possibly in less than a minute, after which the group rapidly retreated to a waiting vehicle and fled the scene. The first breakthrough came from physical evidence: the detached wheel cover left behind and the tire marks imprinted on the road surface. Several nearby residents reported seeing a black car speeding away from the store immediately after the gunshots. Notably, the vehicle was missing a front wheel cover, perfectly matching the item recovered at the scene. These initial details helped sketch out the getaway vehicle, a black car missing a front wheel cover. Police immediately circulated this description across their system and launched a tracking operation. The investigation did not stop there. Surveillance systems were fully mobilized. Detectives quickly reviewed security footage from nearby establishments, and fortunately, their efforts paid off. Extracted footage showed a black car leaving the scene at high speed, heading straight toward Highway 49. By the end of the day, traffic camera systems in the city of Richland reported a crucial lead. Approximately 1 hour after the robbery, a highway camera captured the license plate of a black 2013 Dodge Avenger, whose characteristics completely matched the earlier description. Authorities promptly identified the registered owner as Jadarin Tuggle, a 20-year-old man living in Jackson, nearly 150 kilometers away. Suspecting Tuggle's direct involvement in the case, police went to his registered address that very night, but he was not at home. By the morning of July 26, 2019, through investigative measures, officers tracked down Tuggle's whereabouts. With assistance from a special task force and Jackson police, a cautious arrest operation was carried out at a residence on Gates Lane. Shortly before noon, Jadarin Tuggle was apprehended while hiding there. He appeared visibly surprised and did not have time to resist. Around the same time, authorities also captured Jaquarius Randall, 20 years old, at a car wash on I-20 frontage road. Randall was identified as Tuggle's accomplice and directly connected to the case. After transporting both suspects back to Hattiesburg for questioning, authorities formally filed charges. Both Tuggle and Randall were accused of murdering Lisa Nguyen, along with additional charges related to gang activity and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. During initial interrogations, both suspects gave evasive and contradictory statements. Tuggle, the owner of the vehicle, insisted that he had no prior knowledge of the robbery. He claimed he had merely driven his friends to Hattiesburg to cash a fraudulent check, portraying himself as an innocent driver who had been exploited. However, Randall presented an entirely different narrative. He admitted to being present with the group, but denied firing any shots, shifting the blame to someone else. Notably, Randall stated that there were actually 4 individuals involved, not 3, and that Tuggle had been the one waiting outside behind the wheel to facilitate the escape. Faced with these contradictory statements, investigators were forced to separate Tuggle and Randall for individual interrogations, while also applying psychological tactics to uncover the truth. Although the credibility of both suspects was initially questionable, at least one crucial detail was confirmed. The criminal group consisted of 4 individuals in total, with 3 entering the store and 1 waiting outside as the getaway driver. This meant that beyond Tuggle and Randall, 2 more suspects were still at large. After hours of intense questioning, Randall eventually revealed the identities of the remaining 2 suspects, Christopher Tice, nicknamed Fat Boy, and Stefan Hart, also known as Dunk. Both were well-known figures in Jackson and longtime associates of Tuggle. According to Randall's statement, it was Tice who fired the fatal shots that took Lisa Nguyen's life, while Hart was also armed and acted as backup. He further admitted that all 4 were members of a street gang known for carrying out brazen robberies. This particular plan was allegedly masterminded by Tice, targeting a small suburban store run by an elderly owner who was perceived as unlikely to resist. With this testimony, the direction of the investigation became clearer than ever. Less than a week after the crime, the full profile of the group had been outlined. It was a crucial turning point that brought the case out of the shadows and into the light. However, the greatest challenge at that moment was to swiftly capture the remaining suspects before they could flee far away or resort to more desperate actions. Jackson police immediately joined the effort, monitoring and narrowing down locations frequently visited by Tice and Hart. In the early morning of August 1st, 2019, investigators spotted Stefan Hart traveling along Interstate 20 near Jackson. At exactly 6:30 a.m., a rapid arrest operation was carried out on the highway. Hart was forced to the shoulder and subdued on the spot before he could react. Later that same day, Christopher Tice was apprehended while hiding at an acquaintance's home in Jackson. Thus, in less than 2 weeks, all 4 primary suspects, Tuggle, Randall, Hart, and Tice, had been taken into custody. Meanwhile, the expanded investigation revealed the existence of a 5th suspect, Eric Williams, 20 years old, nicknamed Lil E. He was also part of Tice's circle of friends, but had managed to flee and disappeared shortly after the initial sweep. At this stage, investigators began focusing on gathering evidence to strengthen the case file. An analysis of Tuggle's phone data revealed that one day before the crime, he had searched online for bank robbery movies. This detail was believed to indicate that he was seeking inspiration or guidance on how to carry out the offense. Text messages exchanged between Tuggle, Tice, and Hart prior to July 20th were also successfully recovered. In these conversations, the group discussed going out of town for business and finding a good target, clear-coded references to their trip to Hattiesburg. These compelling pieces of evidence shattered Tuggle's naive claim that he had no prior knowledge of the crime, while confirming the group's organized planning. Furthermore, phone location data verified that the suspects were present at the scene at the exact time the crime occurred. Meanwhile, the sole surviving witness, the customer who had been critically injured, provided invaluable testimony after recovering from life-threatening injuries. According to his account, before entering the store, he saw 3 masked black men inside. One tall, large-built individual immediately opened fire on the store owner, then turned and shot at him, striking his shoulder and causing him to collapse. Before losing consciousness, he managed to see another suspect leap over the cashier counter to grab something, likely the cash register, while the third stood guard at the entrance. This testimony completely aligned with the evidence previously gathered by investigators. Based on the findings, Tice, with his tall and large build, was identified as the shooter. Williams, described as agile, was responsible for taking the cash register, and Hart acted as the lookout. Although the witness could not identify their faces, the described actions closely matched the roles investigators had deduced for each suspect. The investigation reached its conclusion on August 12, 2019, when the final piece of the puzzle, Eric Williams, was captured. Following a trail of leads, police discovered he was hiding in an abandoned house on Wynn Street in Jackson. That afternoon, a special task force stormed the property and found Williams curled up and hiding in the attic, surrounded by dust and thick cobwebs. He was pulled down and placed in handcuffs in a state of despair. With Williams' arrest, every link in the chain of the case was finally in law enforcement's custody. Notably, the group was also suspected of being responsible for a series of other robberies that had previously occurred around the Jackson area. The residents of Hattiesburg could now breathe a sigh of relief upon learning that the robbery gang had been apprehended, yet many still shuddered at the sheer brutality and recklessness of these perpetrators. The suspects in this case were all young men from Jackson, Mississippi, located about a 90-minute drive from Hattiesburg. All were members of a street crime gang known for carrying out daring robberies. The first suspect was Christopher Demon Tice, 26 years old at the time of the crime. Tice had a tall, heavy-set build and was commonly known by the nickname Fat Boy within criminal circles. He was identified as the ringleader of the group and the individual who directly fired the fatal shots that took Lisa Nguyen's life. Due to a prior serious criminal record, Tice also faced an additional charge of unlawful possession of a firearm. Next was Stefan Antonio Hart, 25 years old, also a resident of Jackson. Hart was considered either a close associate or a subordinate of Tice, actively participating in the robbery as an accomplice. He carried a firearm, acted as a lookout, and was prepared to intervene if anyone interfered. Although he did not personally pull the trigger, his involvement in planning the crime and his presence at the scene with a weapon made him equally accountable under the law as Tice. The least experienced member of the group was Jatiran Martel Tuggle, 20 years old. Tuggle was the owner of the vehicle and served as the driver who transported the group to carry out the crime. He had joined the gang as a junior member seeking money and recognition from his seniors. Compared to Tice's aggressiveness, Tuggle appeared more timid, remaining in the car rather than directly confronting the victim. However, the law still identified him as an accomplice to murder, as Lisa Nguyen's death occurred during the armed robbery that he and his associates were committing together. Next was Eric Terrell Williams, also 20 years old and the last suspect to be apprehended. In this case, Williams acted as the one who seized the money. He was the individual who swiftly jumped over the cashier counter, grabbed the cash register containing the money, and fled back to the vehicle. After his accomplices were arrested one by one, Williams went on the run and hid in an abandoned house for several weeks. Finally, there was Jaquarius Randall, 20 years old, a figure who brought a surprising twist to the case. Initially, Randall was arrested alongside Tuggle and faced equally serious charges. However, as the case progressed, Randall was not formally indicted. This may have been due to insufficient evidence to prosecute him, or because he chose to cooperate and provided crucial testimony against his accomplices in exchange for leniency. After gathering sufficient evidence, prosecutors swiftly moved forward with legal proceedings. In September 2020, a Forest County grand jury formally indicted 4 suspects: Christopher Tice, Stefan Hart, Eric Williams, and Jatiran Tuggle on multiple serious charges, including murder, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, aggravated assault, and gang-related activity. Tice alone faced an additional charge of unlawful possession of a firearm due to his prior criminal record. At their initial arraignment and plea hearing in early 2020, Tice, Williams, Hart, and Tuggle all entered pleas of not guilty. However, in 2021, realizing that the evidence against him was overwhelming and irrefutable, Christopher Tice, the man who had pulled the trigger, decided to plead guilty. To avoid facing the death penalty, he admitted to taking the victim's life and was sentenced in April 2021 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, Tice expressed remorse for his actions. The severe sentence received strong public support and was viewed as an initial step toward justice for Lisa Nguyen. Meanwhile, Jatiran Tuggle chose to go to trial rather than plead guilty. His trial took place in November 2021, during which prosecutors presented significant evidence, including vehicle records registered in Tuggle's name, text messages showing his awareness of the plan, testimony from witnesses, and notably from Randall, who had been granted immunity from prosecution. The jury swiftly found Tuggle guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, along with additional prison terms for related charges. Although Tuggle later appealed and succeeded in reducing the additional sentence to 5 years, his life sentence remained unchanged. After witnessing the severe penalties imposed on Tice and Tuggle, the 2 remaining accomplices decided to plead guilty in hopes of receiving leniency. Stefan Hart admitted to second-degree murder, acknowledging that although he had acted as a lookout, he accepted responsibility as an accomplice. In early 2022, Hart received the maximum sentence of 40 years in prison without parole. Shortly thereafter, Eric Williams also pleaded guilty. In December 2021, he was sentenced to a total of 45 years in prison. With the conclusion of the legal proceedings, all 4 defendants paid a heavy price for their actions. Tice and Tuggle received life sentences, Hart was sentenced to 40 years, and Williams to 45 years. The prosecution affirmed that justice had ultimately been served while recognizing the tireless efforts of law enforcement. Although nothing could ever compensate for such a profound loss, these harsh sentences brought a measure of solace to the family of Lisa Nguyen, closing a case that had once shaken the community. The case of Lisa Nguyen concluded with severe sentences for the perpetrators, yet its echoes continue to resonate throughout the Hattiesburg community and across the state of Mississippi. The tragic loss of this gentle Vietnamese woman left many hearts aching. At the time, the media and public paid special attention to the case because during that same weekend in July 2019, Mississippi witnessed the deaths of 5 women in separate incidents. This heartbreaking coincidence sounded an alarm about the escalating violence in the region. The press called it the dark 24 hours in Mississippi, and the story of Lisa Nguyen, an immigrant working hard to pursue the American dream, only to have her life taken by criminals, sparked both outrage and deep sympathy from the public. In Hattiesburg, the impact of the case was profound. Local residents were stunned that their peaceful neighborhood had become the target of a violent robbery gang from out of town. In the aftermath, hundreds of people organized a candlelight vigil in front of the store to pray for Lisa Nguyen. They placed flowers, candles, stuffed animals, and hung banners expressing love and mourning for the woman who had lived such a meaningful life in the hearts of those around her. The victim's family also displayed a large banner outside the store, thanking the community for their support during that difficult time. In the early hours of Saturday, March 11th, 1995, at approximately 2:18 a.m., the 911 dispatch center of the San Jose Police Department received a series of urgent emergency calls. On the other end of the line were panicked voices reporting loud gunshots at a cafe on Monterey Highway. In response to the emergency, police immediately dispatched units to the scene. When the first patrol cars arrived at Mayteam, a venue that operated as both a cafe and an arcade, the scene before them was chaotic. Outside, several frightened patrons were running in all directions, while others stood frozen in shock. Stepping through the shattered glass door, officers had to maneuver around debris scattered across the floor. In the arcade area at the back of the establishment, they discovered 3 victims lying motionless on the ground. Emergency medical personnel arrived promptly to render aid. Tragically, 2 of the male victims showed no signs of life, having died almost instantly from severe injuries. The 3rd victim was still barely breathing and was quickly transported by ambulance to San Jose Medical Center. Police quickly sealed off the area, as flashing red and blue lights tore through the stillness of the night. Inside the cramped arcade room, investigators carefully examined every detail. The crime scene revealed the severity of the attack. Numerous 9mm and .22 caliber shell casings were scattered across the floor, and bullet fragments were lodged deep in the walls and arcade machines. Notably, there were no signs of a struggle or of property being ransacked, leading authorities to immediately conclude that robbery was not the motive. The attackers appeared to have specifically targeted the victims before retreating swiftly. Surviving witnesses were left in extreme shock, requiring officers to separate them individually for questioning. Through fragmented accounts given in fear, a preliminary picture began to emerge. Approximately 6 masked men dressed in dark clothing had suddenly stormed into the arcade area. One of them carried what appeared to be a shotgun, while the others were armed with handguns. They acted aggressively, covering their faces with clothing or scarves upon entering, and without uttering a word, immediately opened fire. Within seconds of the barrage of gunshots, the suspects fled in haste, jumping into 2 waiting vehicles and disappearing into the night. These initial details led investigators to believe that this was not a random act of violence. The coordinated actions concealing their identities, using multiple firearms, and positioning getaway vehicles in advance strongly indicated a targeted retaliation typical of gang-related activity. During their review of related incidents, police discovered that just hours earlier, around 12:30 a.m., another shooting had occurred in San Jose. A Vietnamese man had been seriously wounded at the First Club nightclub on North 1st Street in the northern part of the city. The victim in that incident survived and was identified as Nguyen, a young man known to have connections within local Vietnamese gangs. This crucial lead prompted investigators to consider whether the shooting at Mayteam Café was an act of retaliation for the earlier attack on Nguyen. If that assessment proved correct, it would suggest an ongoing gang conflict in which the 3 unfortunate victims may have inadvertently become casualties of escalating tensions. The key challenge now was to establish a concrete link between the 2 incidents and trace the perpetrators. In the initial hours following the tragedy, police prioritized identifying the 3 victims. The first lead emerged the following afternoon, when the family of a 25-year-old man from Milpitas reported that their son had gone missing after going out on Friday night. This information matched the description of one of the 3 victims, from age to physical appearance. Police immediately asked the family to come in for identification, and heartbreakingly, they confirmed that the victim was their son, Chin Trung Vu. At the same time, fingerprint analysis identified another victim residing in San Jose as Lê Truc Nguyen. The remaining victim, who was also the youngest, was identified through friends as Tri Minh Lê, 21 years old. It was not until 4 days after the incident, once all verification procedures had been completed, that authorities officially released the identities of the 3 victims, all of whom were Vietnamese individuals living in San Jose or nearby areas. Identifying them helped investigators better understand the context of the fatal shooting that night. All 3 had reportedly been at Mayteam Café late Friday evening for entertainment. Tri Minh Lê, 21, and the youngest may have simply stopped by to play arcade games with friends. Chin Trung Vu, 25, from Milpitas, was likely there for a weekend gathering. Meanwhile, Lê Truc Nguyen, 31 and the oldest among them, was possibly a regular customer who came to enjoy coffee and leisure time. Notably, none of them were armed, and according to family members, they had no involvement in gang activity. In other words, the 3 men may have been completely innocent, losing their lives simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Immediately after publicly identifying the victims, the San Jose Police Department assigned its homicide unit to work alongside the gang crimes unit. The first investigative focus was directed toward the earlier shooting that had occurred that same night. According to gathered information, the earlier victim, Nguyen, was known to be a member, or at least closely associated with, a prominent local Vietnamese gang known as the Asian Boys. Therefore, when Nguyen was attacked at the nightclub, it was possible that his associates would not let the incident go unanswered. Through investigative efforts, police quickly narrowed down a group of suspects and gathered significant leads. As suspected, witness accounts indicated that only minutes after Cuong Do was shot, a group of Vietnamese youths gathered at a friend's residence to plan retaliation. The gathering point was the home of Qua Dang Nguyen, a 21-year-old man in San Jose who was a close friend of Cuong Do and frequently associated with members of the Asian Boys gang. It was reported that Qua kept several firearms at his residence for protection. Upon learning that his close associate Cuong Do had been attacked, Qua was furious and immediately joined his friends in planning to track down the perpetrator. According to later testimony, one member of the group received information that the person responsible for attacking Cuong Do was at Café on Monterey Highway. The only identifying detail they had was that the suspect was wearing a brown shirt or jacket. This detail immediately caught investigators' attention, as victim Truc Nguyen had also been wearing a brown jacket at the scene. It raised the troubling possibility that the group had mistakenly identified Truc Nguyen as their intended target. Qua's group that night consisted of very young men between 18 and 22 years old, all of whom had ties to the Asian Boys gang. They quickly armed themselves in preparation. Qua retrieved 2 shotguns, keeping one and handing the other to an accomplice. Sonny Van Nguyen, 18 years old, carried a 9mm Glock handgun, while Sen Jung, 20, was armed with a .22 caliber handgun. The remaining participants included Ho Thai Nguyen, Hein Hin, and Jeffrey Subana, all 19 years old, along with Quang Minh Tran, 22. The group split into 2 vehicles and sped through the night toward Mayteam Café, driven by a desire for retaliation. Along the way, Ho Thai Nguyen instructed everyone to cover their faces during the attack to avoid identification by witnesses. A quick plan was devised. Ho would enter the cafe first to confirm the presence of the man wearing the brown jacket, then signal the others to storm in, carry out the attack, and flee immediately. Events unfolded exactly as later revealed by witnesses and investigators. Ho entered Mayteam, posing as a regular customer. In the arcade area, he saw 3 Vietnamese men playing games, including one wearing a brown jacket, Truc Nguyen. Believing they had found their target, Ho exited to alert the others. At around 2 a.m., Ho and the 6 masked men rushed into the arcade room. The individual armed with a shotgun, believed to be Qua Dang Nguyen, positioned himself at the entrance and fired the first shot at the man wearing the brown jacket. The blast struck Truc Nguyen in the head, causing him to collapse almost instantly. Immediately after, the remaining gunmen opened fire on all 3 men in the room, the deafening shots echoing throughout the confined space. Tri Minh Le was struck by multiple gunshots and collapsed at the scene, while Chin Trung Vu suffered severe injuries to his chest and back, leaving him in critical condition. In a matter of seconds, all 3 victims lay motionless on the floor. After carrying out the attack, the group coldly turned their backs, ran outside, and quickly fled in their vehicles. Leaving the scene, the group headed directly to a safe location to dispose of evidence. They chose the home of an acquaintance to hide the weapons used in the crime, including the shotgun and 2 handguns. In the following days, the San Jose Police Department launched a large-scale manhunt targeting the identified suspects. The first sweep took place on Monday, March 13, 1995, just 2 days after the shooting. Officers suddenly stormed an auto repair shop in Fremont where Con Hin was working, catching him completely off guard as he was subdued and taken into custody. He became the first suspect arrested in connection with the killing of the 3 victims. The very next day, Tuesday, March 14th, authorities carried out a series of early morning raids. As a result, 4 additional suspects were apprehended: Sonny Nguyen, Koa Dang Nguyen, Jeff Subana, and Sang Jung. By Wednesday evening, March 15th, police raided the residence of Ho Thai Nguyen, arresting him and seizing a Honda vehicle believed to have been used as the getaway car. Within just 5 days, 6 of the 8 primary suspects in this serious case had been captured. It was a remarkably swift response, demonstrating the determination and capability of the investigative team. Initially, the suspects denied involvement, but in the face of overwhelming evidence gathered by police, the truth gradually came to light. Based on statements from Han Hin and other accomplices, investigators quickly located the hidden weapons. On March 14th, authorities executed a search warrant at the home of an acquaintance named Lup Trun, where they recovered a shotgun and several handguns concealed on the premises. Subsequent forensic analysis yielded crucial findings. Specifically, 7 9mm shell casings collected at the scene matched the Glock handgun used by Sonny Nguyen. Additionally, the .22 caliber bullets were consistent with Sen Jung's firearm, and the shotgun's gauge and ammunition type matched the shotgun shells recovered at the crime scene. At this point, the identities of the witnesses whom police had successfully persuaded to cooperate were revealed. They were Long Ngo and Nick Dong, friends of the suspects who had been at Kwa's house before the incident but did not directly participate in the shooting. It was Nick Dong who provided crucial testimony, confirming that Kwa and his associates had left the house armed and returned in a panicked state after the attack. Nick firmly stated that he personally saw Kwa holding a shotgun that night. Thanks to these key statements, the case file was quickly solidified. During the expanded investigation, Sun Tru Nguyen, 19 years old and the seventh suspect, was also apprehended. He was arrested on May 19, 1995, at his parents' home in East San Jose after a period of hiding. At that point, only one suspect remained at large, Quang Minh Truong, believed to be the eldest member of the group. However, after several months of intensive pursuit, police working in coordination with the FBI captured Quang Minh Truong at his hideout. With his arrest, all 8 individuals involved in the May Team case were finally in custody, awaiting justice. Following the investigation, prosecutors in Santa Clara County charged all 8 defendants with 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with special circumstances, enhancements, including multiple victims and the use of deadly weapons. These charges exposed the defendants to the harshest penalties under California law, including the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Due to the number of defendants and the complexity of testimony, the court decided to divide the case into 2 separate trials for efficiency. The first trial took place in early 1998, focusing on Sen Jung, Jeffrey Subana, and Quang Minh Truong. Prosecutors argued that the attack was a gang-motivated retaliation for the shooting of Cuong Do, emphasizing that the defendants had carefully prepared by gathering beforehand, arming themselves, concealing their identities, and coordinating their actions during the assault. In contrast, the defense sought to reduce the charges, arguing that the defendants acted under emotional provocation after learning that their friend had been attacked, and even claimed that some participants were merely swept up by the crowd. After deliberation, on May 29, 1998, the jury delivered its verdict. Sen Jung was convicted of first-degree murder for all 3 victims and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years for firearm use as a prior convicted felon. Meanwhile, Jeffrey Subana and Quang Minh Truong were convicted of second-degree murder and each received 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole. They must serve a minimum of 45 years before being eligible for release, in addition to firearm-related sentence enhancements. This outcome was regarded as a near-complete victory for the prosecution. The second trial commenced in mid-1998 for the remaining 5 defendants. Among them, Kwa Dong Nguyen was considered the key figure, as he had assembled the group and fired the first shot. Ho Thai Nguyen and Sunny Vun Nguyen were identified as active participants in the plan, while Hein Hin was viewed as the one who initially proposed the idea of retaliation. After days of intense arguments, the jury concluded that Kwa, Ho, and Sunny were all guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Although not every defendant fired the fatal shot, the doctrine of accomplice liability held them fully responsible for the consequences of the jointly planned attack. Son Trung Nguyen was convicted of second-degree murder due to his comparatively lesser role. However, the case of Con Hin ended in a deadlock, as the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial for that defendant. The judge subsequently sentenced Koa, Ho, and Sunny to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years for the use of a deadly weapon. These severe sentences were intended to ensure they would have little chance of ever returning to society. As for Son Trung Nguyen, he was sentenced to 3 life terms with a minimum of 15 years before eligibility for parole. This effectively meant he would have to serve at least 45 years behind bars before he could apply for parole. In Han Hin's case, it was later reported that he accepted a plea agreement related to second-degree murder or aiding and abetting to avoid a prolonged trial. Although specific details were not publicly disclosed, he likely received a substantial prison sentence. Throughout the trials, the courtroom atmosphere was tense and heavy. While some defendants appeared cold and emotionless, others lowered their heads as witnesses recounted the horrifying moments of that tragic night. In the gallery, the victims' families brought framed photographs of their loved ones and were seen breaking down in tears as heartbreaking details were recounted. When the final sentences were handed down, the declaration that justice has been served echoed through the courtroom, offering a measure of comfort to those left behind. However, the legal story did not end there. Many years into his sentence, Sonny Van Nguyen filed a petition for resentencing under Senate Bill 1437, arguing that he may have been convicted under a theory of indirect accomplice liability. His initial petition was denied, but in 2024, the California Court of Appeal agreed to reconsider the case, opening the possibility of a reduced conviction. In contrast, Ho Thai Nguyen filed a similar petition but was denied relief, as the jury had determined that he acted with clear intent to take a life. That ruling was upheld again in 2024. These developments demonstrate that although the original sentences were imposed in the late 1990s, the legal aftermath of the case has continued for decades. The 1995 massacre at Mayteam Café left a haunting mark on San Jose's criminal history. It was regarded as an exceptionally grave crime that shook the community's sense of safety. In particular, it exposed the darker side of the Asian underworld in the 1990s, a period when groups such as the Asian Boys, Oriental Boys, and other Vietnamese gangs rose to prominence and were willing to engage in violent conflicts over honor and blind loyalty. The three victims were complete strangers to the perpetrators and had no involvement in the original dispute, yet they lost their lives unjustly. The sheer senselessness of the tragedy outraged the public, echoing the bitter headline of one newspaper, "They died for wearing the wrong color." At 11 o'clock at midday on the 14th of September, 1999, rapid response units in Anaheim, California received multiple emergency calls from West Anaheim Hospital. When police arrived, they were met with a chaotic and heartbreaking scene. Alarm sirens were still blaring non-stop, mixed with cries and pleas from injured people throughout the corridors. On the second floor, police found the body of a female nurse's aide, and in the stairwell they discovered the body of a pharmacist, blood spreading across the white tile floor. But the toll did not end there. A third victim, a male, had just been rushed by coworkers into the emergency room in critical condition. Meanwhile, in the first floor lobby, hospital staff were still struggling to restrain an Asian man in his early 40s. Around him, evidence was scattered across the floor, including two .38 caliber handguns and a shoulder bag containing more than 100 rounds of ammunition. Police quickly moved in, seized the weapons, and handcuffed the suspect. The man's face showed a mix of rage and pain. While being pinned down, he repeatedly shouted confusing accusations, claiming that someone had set his mother up. Those furious screams immediately drew investigators' attention, because they might be the key to understanding the motive behind the attack. Authorities quickly sealed off the entire scene. Across the floor, shiny brass shell casings were scattered everywhere. On the walls, blood smears and bullet holes clearly marked the path of the rampaging shooter through 2 floors of the hospital. Outside in the parking lot, investigators located a pickup truck, believed to belong to the perpetrator. Through the windows, they could see several empty ammunition boxes and a local map with the location of West Anaheim Hospital circled in red ink. Fearing there might be explosives planted in the vehicle, police immediately secured the parking area and called in the bomb squad to inspect it. Fortunately, no explosive device was found inside. Around the same time, the suspect's identity was confirmed: Dung Dinh An Trinh, a Vietnamese man living in California. The victims' identities were also soon confirmed. All 3 were hospital employees, and each died from fatal close-range wounds. To better understand the depth of this tragedy, let's look back at the victims' lives and the quiet value they brought to their community. Marlene Mustafa, 60 years old, a devoted nurse's aide at West Anaheim Medical Center, was the first victim in this horrific incident. Marlene was petite and always greeted patients with a warm smile. According to coworkers, she was kind-hearted, cheerful, and deeply dedicated to her work. Before committing herself to the hospital, Marlene's life had gone through many ups and downs. She had 8 biological children, and after a long period of single life, she reunited with her first love, David Mustafa, and married him in 1993. She loved her husband's 5 children as if they were her own, and gradually brought both sides of the family together into a harmonious home. Neighbors of the Mustafa family said Marlene loved gardening, and they saw her nearly every day tending the tomato plants in her front yard. She was also eager to learn. Even at 60, Marlene worked while attending evening classes, hoping to improve her skills and create more opportunities for advancement. Her sudden death left unbearable grief for her elderly husband and their children and grandchildren. The second victim was Vincent Rossetti, 51 years old, the hospital's director of pharmacy. Vincent was a veteran pharmacist who had devoted more than 20 years to West Anaheim. He lived in Seal Beach and was described by those around him as a quiet man, dedicated to his work and always putting family first. Although divorced, Vincent still cared for his two daughters and saw them as the light of his life. His older daughter, Angela, was in her final year of medical school, while his younger daughter, Rebecca, was a teacher and lived with her father. Neighbors said Vincent was always willing to play with the children in the neighborhood and often generously offered free medical advice to people around him. In his professional career, Vincent Rossetti was highly respected. A few years earlier, he had the honor of receiving an award from the World Health Organization for helping develop a childhood vaccination program. With his humble personality, Vincent rarely told anyone about this achievement. It was only when he requested a few days off to travel to London to accept the award that people were surprised to learn about it. On that fateful morning, tragedy struck when Vincent ran toward danger to help his colleagues and was shot down while trying to reach the scene. The final victim was Ronald Robertson, 51 years old. Ronald served as the hospital's director of environmental services, overseeing sanitation, safety, and maintenance for 10 years. To his co-workers, Ronald was a tall man, quiet but gentle, and deeply devoted to his work. He consistently carried out his duties without complaint and was always ready to help anyone in need. Few people knew that Ronald Robertson had once been a U.S. military veteran. However, injuries from the war forced him to give up his dream of becoming a pilot. After returning home, Ronald studied hospital administration and remained in the field for many years. In 1981, he married Suzanne, a nurse. The family later moved to Fullerton and had 2 sons and 1 daughter, all of whom were teenagers in 1999. In the eyes of relatives and neighbors, Ronald was an exemplary husband and father, someone who loved children and actively took part in community activities. On the morning of the 14th of September, when gunshots rang out inside the hospital, Ronald Robertson immediately ran into danger to protect those around him. From his office on the first floor, he sprinted across the parking lot and straight into the building, shouting warnings while trying to get close to the attacker. Ronald reached a corridor near the stairwell just as the suspect was moving toward the crowded lobby. Even without any protection in his hands, he tried to hold the double doors leading into the lobby shut, hoping to block the shooter's path. Moments later, a bullet struck his chest and made him stagger, but the brave veteran did not back down. Ronald used his own body to brace the doors, and when the attacker closed in, he immediately grabbed him in a bear hug and refused to let go. The 2 men struggled and fell to the floor. Dung fired 2 more shots at close range. Ronald Robertson then collapsed, overwhelmed by catastrophic injuries. That courageous attempt to stop him prevented the attacker from entering the crowded lobby area. Because of it, dozens of people in the waiting room escaped danger. Ronald Robertson was rushed into emergency surgery but died only minutes later on the operating table. His sacrifice was recognized and honored. Ronald Robertson was posthumously awarded the Carnegie Medal, a distinction given for acts of extraordinary bravery in saving others. Although the perpetrator was identified and arrested at the scene, police and investigators still had to conduct a thorough investigation to piece together the entire sequence of events. Forensic testing later confirmed that all 3 victims died from gunfire, discharged from the 2 handguns Dung Dinh An Trinh had brought with him. Of the 2 weapons, one had been fired until the cylinder was empty, while the other still contained its full remaining rounds. At that time, hospital security camera systems were not as widespread as they are today. However, statements from dozens of eyewitnesses who were present helped police reconstruct the incident in considerable detail. First, investigators interviewed Mila Salvador, a nursing supervisor who narrowly survived after being nearly hit. According to her account, Dung had tried to aim at her, but missed. This suggested that he was not merely acting in a moment of uncontrolled rage, he truly intended to take as many lives as possible. At the Anaheim Police Department, Dung Din An Trent appeared strangely cooperative. The 43-year-old admitted to everything and showed no remorse. During questioning, Dung remained cold and detached. At times his eyes looked empty, but whenever his mother was mentioned, they would immediately flare red with anger. According to his statement, he had planned the attack in advance. Because his biological mother, Moat Trent, 72 years old, had been ill for a long time, Dung gradually developed resentment toward the hospitals that treated her but could not cure her. He prepared 2 loaded revolvers at home and carried more than 100 extra rounds of ammunition in a bag. Dung admitted that on the morning of the 14th of September, right after he received news that his mother had died, he drove home to get the guns and then went straight to West Anaheim, the place where his mother had been treated back in June, ready to carry out a horrific massacre. His initial targets were specific nurses and doctors whom he believed had not cared for his mother properly. According to witnesses, in a frenzied state, Dung aimed at a nurse who had directly cared for his mother, but she managed to duck and narrowly escaped. Instead, the bullet struck Marlene Mustafa, who was standing nearby. Clearly, this was not a random incident or a baseless outburst, but a deliberate act prepared in advance. Only days after the attack, the Anaheim Police Department completed the investigative file with sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against Dung Din An Trent for multiple killings and attempted murder. Before being pulled into a spiral of distorted hatred, the shooter in this story had endured long-term psychological wounds, social isolation, and misguided beliefs that accumulated over time. Dung Din An Trent was born around 1956 in Vietnam and was the only son in his family. Dung's life was shaped by historical upheaval. In 1975, at 18 years old, he immigrated with his mother, Moat Trent, to Orange County, California. From that point on, the two of them depended on each other in a foreign land, with almost no relatives or extended family nearby. Dung graduated from high school in the United States, but did not pursue college, entering working life early to make ends meet. For many years, he worked various jobs, mostly manual labor within the Vietnamese community. Many people describe Dung as quiet and withdrawn, yet deeply devoted to his mother. To him, she was not only his only close family member, but the center of his life. For years, well into his 40s, Dung continued living with his mother and caring for her directly. He never married and did not socialize much outside. Neighbors remarked that the two had an unusually tight bond, almost inseparable, going everywhere together. By 1999, when Moat's health began to decline severely, Dung quit his job so he could care for her full-time. That decision quickly pushed them into financial hardship. With no steady income and rising medical costs, Dung was forced to declare bankruptcy just weeks after leaving work. After his mother became seriously ill, Dung's mental state also grew increasingly unstable. He frequently became tense and suspicious of everything around him. According to people who knew him, Dung repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with modern medicine, believing that Western drugs and doctors were making his mother's condition worse. At the same time, Dung also carried deep resentment tied to the past and to history. In court, he bluntly stated that Americans had destroyed his homeland and voiced hatred toward what he saw as their cruelty. Those hate-filled statements suggested he was profoundly affected by wartime memories and had failed to truly integrate into his new society. In terms of personality, before the tragedy, neighbors described Dung as gentle, simple, and not outwardly aggressive. However, his worsening mental state, combined with prolonged social isolation, pushed him toward extreme thinking. Within only hours after his mother died, Dung Din An Trent changed completely from a devoted son into a killer driven by hatred and no longer in control of his actions. Based on statements from the suspect and eyewitnesses, the full sequence of this tragedy was reconstructed in considerable detail. On the morning of the 14th of September, 1999, at a small apartment in Anaheim, Dung Din An Trent saw his biological mother, Moat Trent, fall into critical condition. At around 5:40 in the morning, Trent panicked and called 911 after seeing that his mother had stopped breathing and was bleeding from the mouth. He attempted CPR as instructed until an ambulance arrived and took Mrs. Moat to Anaheim Memorial Hospital. When Doong arrived at the hospital at around 8 o'clock in the morning, he received the devastating news that his mother had died from cardiac arrest. Having lost the only family member he had in a foreign land, Doong collapsed emotionally, screaming and crying, then sitting in silence beside his mother's body in a state of despair mixed with resentment. In that disturbed state of mind, Doong believed that the hospitals that had treated her before, especially West Anaheim, where she had received care, were the reason she was gone. After leaving the hospital, Doong drove home, took two .38 special revolvers and more than 100 rounds of ammunition, then drove back to West Anaheim Hospital. At around 10:30 in the morning, less than 2 hours after his mother died, Doong entered the hospital carrying the weapons on him. He went straight up to the second floor and stormed into the chief nursing office, where Supervisor Mila Salvador was speaking with nurse's aide Marlene Mustafa. Without saying a word, Doong fired at very close range, and Marlene Mustafa collapsed immediately. He then fired another shot at Salvador but missed. When Salvador managed to slam the door shut and barricade herself inside, Doong immediately left and began searching for other targets. In the stairwell, he encountered Vincent Rossetti, the director of pharmacy, who had been running up to help his colleagues. Without hesitation, Doong fired repeatedly, and Rossetti fell right on the stairs. He then continued down to the first floor, where Ronald Robertson rushed in to block the double doors leading into the crowded lobby. Even after being hit, Robertson kept holding the doors shut to stop Doong from entering until he collapsed from his severe injuries. During the struggle, Doong dropped one of the guns and his ammunition bag onto the floor. Seizing that moment, a patient named Joe Nuzzo and several hospital employees rushed in to restrain Doong, pinning him to the ground until police arrived. The horrific sequence ended within minutes, but it took the lives of 3 victims: Marlene Mustafa, Vincent Rossetti, and Ronald Robertson. When arrested at the scene, Doong showed no remorse. In the police vehicle, he repeatedly hurled curses, insisting that Americans had caused his mother's death and that he was simply carrying out revenge. As he was led away in handcuffs, Doong coldly expressed his desire to receive the harshest sentence as soon as possible. However, the legal process that followed did not unfold the way he expected. Not long afterward, Doong Dinh Anh Trint's case was quickly brought before the courts. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, with a special circumstance for multiple victims, along with 1 count of attempted murder involving Mila Salvador. In light of the clear evidence, the Orange County District Attorney's Office decided to pursue the maximum penalty allowed by law. Doong himself publicly expressed a desire to receive a death sentence as soon as possible so he could be reunited with his mother. However, the actual legal proceedings were lengthy and intensely contested. On the other hand, prosecutors presented a firm argument that this was an exceptionally serious case, planned in advance and extremely dangerous. They stressed that Doong bringing 2 guns and more than 100 rounds of ammunition showed an intent to harm as many people as possible rather than a momentary outburst. The fact that the defendant targeted hospital staff while largely sparing patients and family members was seen as evidence of deliberate selection. Prosecutors even argued that Doong might have carried out similar attacks elsewhere if he had not been restrained in time. During the trial, Doong Dinh Anh Trint also took the witness stand himself. He spoke at length about his love for his mother, but quickly shifted into an angry tone as he blamed hospitals and American doctors. While speaking, Doong even made political statements, forcing the judge to interrupt him repeatedly. He bluntly declared that he felt no remorse and even insisted he would do it all again if given the chance. That cold attitude and defiant language made the courtroom atmosphere heavy and suffocating. After closing arguments, the jury quickly reached a unanimous decision, finding Doong Trint guilty of first-degree murder for all 3 victims, with aggravating circumstances related to the number of victims, along with a conviction related to attempted murder. However, it was not until a 3rd penalty phase hearing in 2003, after prosecutors presented a tighter case and the defendant's arrogant attitude continued to be displayed in court, that the jury unanimously imposed the death penalty on Doong Dinh Anh Trint under the law. When the verdict was read, Dung showed no fear. He even smiled in a defiant, challenging way. Meanwhile, the victims' families expressed relief that justice had been served, even though they knew nothing could ever make up for their loss. After the verdict, the case went through the automatic appeals process to the Supreme Court of California. By 2014, the court upheld the sentence, bringing the state-level legal process to a close. However, due to the nature of California's justice system and the moratorium on executions, Dung An Trinh continued to live for decades on death row at San Quentin, unable to be reunited with his mother as he claimed to want. Dung An Trint's mass shooting at West Anaheim Hospital became a harsh wake-up call about security gaps in healthcare settings. West Anaheim Hospital later tightened protective measures, including increasing armed security personnel, installing metal detectors, and conducting drills to respond to violent incidents. From this case, many hospitals across the United States also reviewed their security procedures and recognized that psychological pressure in healthcare environments, if not managed and supported in time, can lead to dangerous conflicts. At the time, some media portrayed Dung's motive as a son taking revenge for his mother. But that narrative was quickly rejected. In reality, there was no evidence showing that West Anaheim Hospital committed serious wrongdoing in its treatment. Moat Trint died at 72 from natural heart failure, and a review by the California Department of Health noted only minor deficiencies unrelated to her case. This indicated that the root of the tragedy did not come from medical malpractice, but from distorted beliefs and a warped resentment that had built up in Dung's mind. Public opinion at the time was conflicted, outraged by the perpetrator's brutality, yet also unable to ignore the tragedy of a man who, after losing his only emotional anchor, fell into blind hatred. Nearly 2 decades later, the painful memory still haunted those involved. West Anaheim Hospital erected a memorial to honor the 3 colleagues who died that day. Ronald Robertson, in particular, was also honored on the Carnegie Hero Fund's Roll of Honor for individuals who showed extraordinary bravery in saving others, an enduring reminder of courage and of the painful price this tragedy left behind. At 10:30 a.m. on Friday, April 3, 2009, the Broome County Sheriff's Office received a flood of urgent emergency calls from the ACA building on Front Street in Binghamton, New York. One of the most notable calls came from Shirley DeLucia, the ACA receptionist, who had been critically injured but still managed to crawl under a desk and call for help. In a whispered call that lasted 39 minutes, DeLucia provided 911 dispatchers with crucial information. A suspect was using a firearm to attack people inside the building in a frenzied rampage. Multiple people had already gone down, the shooter was still inside, and hostages might be involved. A rapid response was deployed immediately. When the first police units arrived, they saw the front door of the building wide open, while the back door was blocked by a gray car parked across it. Police quickly secured the perimeter and surrounded the building. Nearby Binghamton High School was also ordered to shut down as an emergency precaution. At that moment, no one knew for sure whether the attacker was still inside or had escaped, how many suspects there were, or what the fate of those inside might be. When the SWAT team arrived, they assessed that the situation could be extremely complex. The building had multiple classrooms, and there was information suggesting the shooter might be Vietnamese because witnesses reported hearing a Vietnamese voice. To prepare for possible negotiations, police even brought in a Vietnamese professor named Nguyen from nearby Broome Community College, in case they needed to communicate in Vietnamese. At 11:13 a.m., more than 40 minutes after the shooting, the SWAT team began entering the building to rescue hostages. The tension was suffocating as they moved cautiously from room to room, since the shooter's identity and location were still unknown. Inside the ACA building, a horrific scene unfolded before law enforcement. At the reception area near the entrance, they found 2 employees who had been shot. One had died, the other was Shirley DeLucia. She had suffered a severe abdominal wound but was still alive. Moving deeper inside, the tactical team saw the door to a classroom nearby slightly ajar. Inside, the heartbreaking sight left even seasoned officers speechless. Dozens of people lay scattered among overturned desks and chairs, with blood spattered everywhere. The faint moans of the wounded mixed with an eerie, hair-raising silence from the motionless bodies. In that classroom, police initially determined that 13 victims had died, 1 teacher and 12 students, along with several others who were injured. However, in the middle of the room, collapsed among the innocent victims, there was one more body. It was a man wearing a light blue jacket, body armor, and black-framed glasses. His hand was still gripping a firearm tightly. Investigators quickly recovered 2 semi-automatic handguns at the scene, a 9mm Beretta and a .45 caliber Beretta. Both had been fired nearly empty, with a total of 99 rounds discharged. Shell casings were scattered across the classroom floor, underscoring the frenzied nature of the attack. The building's rear exit was blocked by a Honda, suggesting the shooter had intentionally cut off the victim's escape route from the start. These early clues painted the picture of a premeditated attack carried out swiftly and efficiently. However, the specific identity of the gunman and of the victims still required detailed investigation and confirmation. Because no one appeared to have escaped the scene, and there was a suspicious male body present, investigators urgently wanted to identify the victims to narrow down the suspect list. At first, this proved challenging. The morning class included many students of different nationalities. Some carried identification, but others had no documents on them. Authorities had to coordinate with diplomatic offices after receiving inquiries from representatives of 9 countries and 2 consulates seeking information about whether their citizens might be among the victims. After 48 hours of cross-checking, by the late afternoon of April 5, 2009, the identities of the bodies in the classroom were officially released. Each of those people had their own background and life story, but they shared a common dream, a better life. They came to English class every morning hoping to build a brighter future for themselves and their families. Among the 14 who did not survive, 11 were immigrants or refugees from countries such as Pakistan, Brazil, Haiti, China, Vietnam, Iraq, and the Philippines. They were people who had endured hardship to reach the United States, carrying hopes of integrating and contributing to their second home. One such victim was Layla Khalil, 57 years old, who had survived 3 bomb attacks back in Iraq. She had moved to the United States just 7 months earlier to escape the violence of war. Yet, in a cruel twist of fate, the mother of 3 lost her life in another senseless armed attack, this time in America. There were also victims who were a married couple learning English together, like Mark Bernard, 44 years old, and Marie Bernard, 46 years old, from Haiti. They had immigrated to the United States with their 2 young children, and the tragedy left those children orphaned. Also in that class was Almir Olimpio Alves, 43 years old, a Brazilian PhD in mathematics conducting research at Binghamton University. He was an outstanding student who loved languages. According to surviving witnesses, when the attacker stormed into the classroom, Alves bravely threw a chair toward the gunman in an attempt to stop him. Although he could not regain control of the situation, classmates called him a silent hero for trying to protect everyone. Similarly, heartbreaking was the story of Long Nguyen and Lan Ho, a Vietnamese couple. When the attack happened, Long risked his life to shield his wife. Although it could not save Lan, their devotion left everyone who heard the story in tears. The only 2 victims born in the United States were also people who had been helping the immigrant community. They were Roberta Bobby King, 72 years old, a volunteer English teacher, and Maria Mima Zabnu, 60 years old, a part-time social worker at the center. Roberta King was an energetic grandmother with 17 grandchildren, and even after retirement, she still loved teaching to help immigrants learn English. Maria Zabnu was not even scheduled to be at work that day. She had planned to stay home baking for Easter, but when she received a call asking for help interpreting Ukrainian, she warmly drove to the center to help a compatriot complete paperwork. That kindness also placed her in the wrong place at a fateful moment. The victim list also included Parveen Ali, 26 years old, from Pakistan, a passionate young woman who wanted to become a teacher. In addition, among those who did not survive was a group of Chinese victims. Li Guo, 47 years old, Jiang Ling, 22 years old, Hongshu Amy, Mao Marsland, 35 years old, and Hai Hongzheng, 54 years old. This list, together with the receptionist near the entrance, formed a long line of names and heartbreaking stories. But with 14 bodies in the room, one final figure drew particular attention from police, the man wearing body armor at the scene. Already a prime suspect because he was found holding a firearm, information about him soon became clearer than ever, and investigators felt they were on the right track. It was Jiverly Wong, 41 years old. Police identified him through a New York driver's license bearing his name. The license plate of the car blocking the rear exit also matched information linked to Wong's family. Even so, police cross-verified the details to ensure there was no mistake and no accomplice involved. They contacted Jiverly Wong's parents locally, an elderly Vietnamese couple, and quickly received a painful confirmation. Their son had indeed carried out the massacre. At this point, the identity question was resolved. The shooter was Jiverly Wong, and he had taken his own life at the scene. But an even bigger question now emerged. Why did Jiverly Wong do this? As soon as investigators confirmed that Jiverly Wong was the shooter, they began digging into his past to understand his motive. Jiverly Antares Wong, whose birth name was Vuong Phut Linh, was born on December 8, 1967, in Vietnam, into an ethnic Chinese family of the Nung ethnicity living in southern Vietnam. In the late 1980s, his parents, Henry Vuong and Mui Thong, brought the whole family to the United States and settled in New York. Later, Jiverly became a U.S. citizen in 1995 and changed his name in an American style to Jiverly Wong. Records show that in 1992, he was arrested in California for forging documents and received a relatively light sentence. Aside from that, his criminal record was fairly clean. There were no indications of any serious violent crimes prior to 2009. Wong later married a Chinese woman named Xu Ping Jiang while living in California, but the two divorced and had no children. He spent many years in Los Angeles, working as a delivery driver for a sushi company for nearly 7 years. In July 2007, Wong abruptly quit his job without notice and moved back to New York to live near his parents in the Binghamton area. In New York, Jiverly Wong looked for new work but was unable to keep a stable job. Early rumors claimed he had been fired from the local IBM plant, but IBM later confirmed it had never employed anyone named Jiverly Wong. In reality, he worked at a shop vac vacuum cleaner factory until it shut down in November 2008, leaving him unemployed. That event coincided with the 2008 economic recession and likely dealt a heavy blow to Wong's mental state. No job, poor English, and a bleak future, Wong appeared to slip into depression and resentment. In early 2009, he enrolled in ESL English classes at the ACA Center from January through March, but his attendance was inconsistent, and he stopped showing up entirely in early March 2009. His teacher said Wong was a quiet student with weak English skills, sometimes appearing insecure and easily hurt. Although no one bullied him in class, Wong kept to himself and did not talk much with anyone. When he suddenly stopped coming to class, no one imagined it was a sign that a dark plan was taking shape. During the investigation, police searched Jiverly Wong's residence in Johnson City. He lived with his parents, and when they learned their son was the killer, they were devastated. They cooperated with police and turned over Wong's remaining belongings. No clear manifesto or diary was found at the home, but investigators discovered Wong had an interest in firearms. In his room, there were gun magazines, receipts for ammunition purchases, and a membership card for a gun club. According to the club's manager, Wong had been coming in frequently to practice shooting in the weeks leading up to the attack. Just a few days before, he had even come to test fire and asked someone to take photos of him holding 2 guns, appearing excited. Those photos were later found inside a special package he mailed out right before carrying out the crime. A major breakthrough in the investigation came on April 6, 2009, 3 days after the attack. A local television station called News 10, now in Syracuse, informed police that they had received a suspicious envelope from someone listed as J. Wong, Johnson City. Inside the envelope was a 2-page handwritten letter, along with several photographs and identification documents. The station manager recalled, "I had just opened the stack of mail and saw a white envelope addressed to News 10, now from J. Wong. When I read the opening line, 'I am Jiverly Wong,' I shot those people. I started trembling because I immediately understood what I was holding." The envelope had been mailed on the very day of the attack, as shown by the postmark dated April 3, 2009, the same day the shooting occurred. The letter was immediately turned over to the FBI and authorities for examination. The contents of Jiverly Wong's suicide letter were chilling. He wrote entirely in capital letters in clumsy, disorganized English, opening with a confession. The 2-page letter was a rambling outpouring of paranoia and fury. Wong repeatedly complained that his life was terrible, blaming the police for making him suffer and keeping him poor. Wong claimed that for 18 years he had been followed and harassed by undercover police, who stole his money, vandalized his car 32 times, and even broke into his home at night and touched him while he slept. He also bitterly described losing his job in late 2008 and accused the New York Department of Labor of cheating him out of unemployment benefits. Throughout the letter, the writing was chaotic, revealing a severely paranoid mind and deep hatred towards society. Jiverly Wong believed the entire world was oppressing him, and he wanted revenge. Notably, at the end of the letter, he did not clearly explain why he targeted the immigrant center or those specific victims. Instead, he ended with a chillingly sarcastic line that roughly translates to, "Have a nice day." Along with the letter, the envelope also contained photos of Wong smiling while holding firearms, a handgun permit, and a copy of his driver's license. All of it showed he had planned carefully, sending out his distorted explanation right before he carried out the attack. Binghamton Police Chief Joseph Zikuski confirmed the package was authentic and said the letter had been forwarded to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for study. Based on initial assessments, experts believed Wong showed signs consistent with paranoid psychosis, a delusional belief that he was a victim. Forensic psychologist James Knoll stated that the anger, frustration, and need for revenge expressed in the letter were the driving forces behind the crime. In other words, Jiverly Wong was so consumed by delusions of being pushed aside that he chose to strike back with violence. He selected the ACA Center, where he had once studied and felt like a failure, a place filled with people he resented because they still had hope, while his own life had reached a dead end. Investigators continued interviewing Wong's relatives and former coworkers to find more clues. Some people who had worked with Wong at the factory recalled that he often expressed dissatisfaction with America, had lashed out verbally about the country, and at one point even talked about plotting to kill President Barack Obama, who had only recently taken office at the time. Those remarks had once been dismissed, but in hindsight they appeared to be dangerous warning signs of Wong's extreme thinking. However, his family seemed shocked. Emily Wong, the shooter's younger sister, told the media that no one at home believed her brother could erupt into such violence, even though they knew he was depressed due to unemployment. The gap between how family members and outsiders perceived him highlighted the complex profile of the perpetrator. After years of living in isolation and bitterness, Wong gradually developed distorted thoughts that his family did not recognize. At the same time, he did not show clear enough signs in public for anyone to intervene in time. The investigation also ruled out other theories such as terrorism. Police concluded it was the act of a lone wolf, a desperate man suffering from mental disturbance and driven by personal resentment towards society. Based on the clues collected and the contents of the suspect's own suicide letter, police were able to reconstruct the entire sequence of the attack. On the morning of Friday, April 3, 2009, Jiverly Wong woke up early at his parents' home in Johnson City. Wong put on a light green nylon jacket with body armor underneath, wore a wig, and black-framed glasses. He brought 2 handguns loaded with full magazines, along with multiple spare magazines, then drove a gray Honda Civic away from the house. Earlier, Wong had already placed an envelope in the outgoing mail, his suicide letter to News 10 Now. Everything was ready. At around 10:25 a.m., Wong drove to the ACA building on Front Street. He circled to the back and parked sideways to block the rear exit completely, preventing anyone from escaping that way. He then got out and walked toward the front entrance. That morning at the ACA building, a citizenship class was taking place in the main classroom near the front door, with about 16 students and a teacher. At the reception desk by the entrance, 2 staff members were on duty. They saw an unfamiliar Asian man in a green jacket walk in. Before they could greet him, the first shots rang out. Wong fired at the 2 receptionists at close range. One was shot in the head and died almost instantly. Shirley DeLucia was shot in the abdomen and collapsed, blood pooling rapidly. According to her later account, Wong did not say a single word as he opened fire, his face icy and emotionless. Believing both women were dead, he left them and moved deeper into the building. Despite unbearable pain, DeLucia managed to reach for the landline phone hidden beneath the counter and dial 911. She whispered that there was an attacker, then kept the line open so police could hear the sounds from inside. Meanwhile, Wong stood outside the classroom door, where the 16 people inside had no idea what had just happened in the lobby. He kicked the door open and charged in. Under the horrified eyes of the teacher and students, he immediately opened fire on them one by one. The small classroom erupted with continuous gunshots. The victims screamed in panic and then quickly fell silent, most collapsing to the floor within the first few seconds. No one had time to escape because the rear exit was blocked. A few others instinctively dropped to the ground, pretending to be unconscious. In his frenzy, Wong fired nonstop, swapping magazines with lightning speed. Almir Alves bravely grabbed a chair and hurled it at the attacker. The chair grazed Wong's shoulder, startling him for a split second. But Wong immediately turned and shot Alves. Nearby, Long Nguyen rushed toward his wife, Lan Ho, trying to shield her. Wong coldly fired multiple shots at them. Then Wong swept his gun toward the others. The teacher, Roberta King, standing near the blackboard, was also shot down. Cries and wailing rose and then were cut off within a single minute. In that brief rampage, Wong shot 16 people in the room, 13 of whom died at the scene. Fortunately, some people in the building managed to flee or hide before Wong found them. A small group of students ran down to the basement as soon as they heard the shots. Others quickly hid inside a closet and locked the door. Wong did not notice those who had managed to disappear. He stepped out of the classroom and looked down the hallway, as if listening for movement outside. At that moment, the building alarm and distant police sirens began to sound. Less than 3 minutes after the first shot, first responders had arrived outside the building. Wong realized the police were closing in. His mad plan was essentially complete. He decided to end his own life. He stepped back into the middle of the blood-soaked classroom, pressed the 9mm Beretta to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The final gunshot rang out, ending the killer's life. When the SWAT team surrounded the building, they did not yet know the shooter was already dead. Police used loudspeakers to call for surrender, but there was only silence inside. Hostages hiding in closets and in the basement held their breath, terrified of being discovered. It was not until 11:13 a.m., after more than 40 minutes of standoff, that SWAT finally dared to enter, fearing explosives or booby traps. They found several survivors trembling as they crawled out of hiding. Inside the classroom, the devastating scene left everyone stunned. 14 people had died, and 4 injured victims were rushed for emergency treatment. Everything had happened between 10:30 and 10:33 a.m. The attack ended in a flash, but the consequences were enormous. When the timeline is pieced together, it becomes clear that Jiverly Wong achieved the dark goal he had set for himself to take as many lives as possible, then kill himself. In his letter, he wrote that he wanted to take at least 2 people with me, but in reality, he killed 13 people in the classroom. Wong's absolute coldness and total silence during the attack haunted the survivors. It showed he was completely composed and determined to carry it through to the end. In that moment, pulling the trigger may have felt like an extreme release to him. He poured all of his hatred onto innocent people around him without a trace of compassion. Then, when he heard the police and knew the show was about to end, he took his own life to escape responsibility, and perhaps to follow the plan he had already set. That split-second suicide closed the path of hatred Jiverly Wong had chosen, but it opened endless grief for the victims' families and the Binghamton community. Because Jiverly Wong died at the scene, no criminal trial was held in this case. However, that did not mean the matter ended simply. Legally, authorities conducted a post-incident investigation and prepared an after-action report to draw lessons for future emergencies. The report later concluded that because the attacker acted so quickly, only 3 minutes, law enforcement had no opportunity to stop the casualties. Even so, it also recognized the courage of people like DeLucia, who managed to call 911, allowing police to lock down the scene in time, which may have prevented Wong from escaping or harming more people. On April 9, 2009, a public memorial was held, attended by hundreds of people, including the then governor of New York, David Paterson. Governor Paterson ordered flags across the state to be flown at half-staff on April 8, 2009, in honor of the victims. The U.S. president at the time, Barack Obama, also sent condolences, calling the shooting an act of senseless violence and expressing deep sympathy to the families of the victims. A heavy grief hung over the community for weeks afterward, but it also revealed rare unity as local residents of all ethnicities and faiths came together to help, donate funds to support the victims' families, and join interfaith prayer gatherings. At around 8:20 p.m. on the night of the 21st of January, 2023, while the Star Ballroom dance event on West Garvey Avenue in Monterey Park was reaching its peak, a series of deafening bangs suddenly rang out. At first, some people mistook them for New Year's fireworks, but when bodies began collapsing onto the floor, everyone realized they were facing an armed attack. In an instant, the festive atmosphere turned into chaos, screams, overturned tables and chairs, injured people scattering in every direction, clinging to any possible lifeline. 3 guests rushed into a nearby restaurant and begged the owner to lock the doors. 6 others jumped into a local resident's pickup truck as he was withdrawing cash at a roadside ATM, desperately pleading for him to start the engine. Emergency calls to 911 flooded in. Within minutes, police and ambulance sirens echoed through the streets of Monterey Park. A rapid response unit from the Monterey Park Police Department rushed to the Star Ballroom. Paramedics quickly treated the injured, while officers carefully moved in and secured the scene. Inside the dance hall, colored lights still flashed over music that had been abruptly cut off, but the dance floor was stained with blood. In total, 11 bodies lay scattered around, many still wearing their dance shoes, collapsing while their hands were still tightly holding their dance partners. Police recovered a total of 42 9mm shell casings scattered across the scene, along with a large-capacity magazine. This indicated the attacker used a semi-automatic firearm capable of firing many rounds rapidly. Authorities also found a motorcycle abandoned 1 block from the scene. Had the attacker prepared a backup escape plan using a 2-wheeled vehicle? This unexpected clue raised the possibility that the mass attack had been carefully planned in advance. Next, after gathering fragmented statements from surviving witnesses who were still in shock, police issued an alert to locate a middle-aged Asian male suspect. This information left many people stunned. At the time, many Chinese residents feared the attack could be a hate crime targeting Asians amid post-COVID-19 discrimination. So the fact that the suspect was also from the same community only made everything even more perplexing. At police headquarters, investigators were faced with a scene full of unanswered questions. Who was the attacker? What motive drove him to be so brutal toward people from his own community? Did he have a personal grudge against any of the victims, or was this simply a frenzied rampage with no specific target? To begin answering those questions, police started by looking into the victims' backgrounds in order to narrow the scope of the investigation. At the scene, officers collected personal belongings and identification documents from the victims for verification. However, the initial identification process faced many obstacles. Some elderly victims had Chinese names and documents written in Chinese, while others used nicknames instead of their legal names. To avoid mistakes, investigators had to rely on interpreters and reach out to the local Chinese community. At the same time, dozens of anxious families gathered at the Langley Senior Center in Monterey Park, which had been set up as a support site for victims' relatives. The atmosphere inside was unbearably tense. One woman sobbed as she told police that her fiancé, who had planned to celebrate New Year's Eve with her, had been shot and taken to a hospital, but she did not know which one. Coordinators had to quickly compile patient lists from nearby hospitals to notify families. The first major clue that helped reveal the victims' identities came from unanswered ringing phones, echoing from multiple cell phones scattered across the dance floor. From these phones, police were able to contact the victims' families one by one. But it was not until 2 days later that the identities of all 11 people who died were fully released. They included 6 women and 5 men, all over the age of 50, from different backgrounds but united by a shared passion for dancing. One notable name was Ms. Mai Mi Nan, 65 years old, who was of Vietnamese origin, immigrated to the United States in the 1980s, lived alone, and saw the dance floor as her joy in later life. Another was Mr. Valentino Marcos Alvaro, 68 years old, a Filipino-American. He was remembered as an energetic uncle figure who loved telling stories and livening up the atmosphere. Next was Mr. Mingwei Ma, 72 years old, affectionately called Teacher Ma, originally an immigrant from China, a veteran dance instructor, and a respected manager at Stardance Studio. On the night of the tragedy, Mr. Ma was the first to rush in and try to stop the killer in order to save others, and he died a heroic death. The victim list also included Mr. Chia Lur William Yao, 76 years old, and Mr. Yu Andy Cao, 72 years old. Both were elderly Taiwanese dancers, deeply loved by their dance partners for their friendly personalities and for always guiding newcomers on the dance floor. Every name and every age revealed left the community heartbroken. They were all kind people who treated the dance hall like a second home. They died while doing what they loved most in the very first days of the new year. Because it took so long to identify the victims and the connections between them were unclear, an investigation focused on personal grudges did not seem feasible. In the aftermath of the attack, time felt frozen in the face of uncertainty. But in reality, the moment police arrived at the first scene, a turning point was already unfolding. Less than 20 minutes after the attack in Monterey Park, authorities received a second emergency report from the neighboring city of Alhambra. An armed man had stormed into Lai Ballroom and Studio in Alhambra, but people inside managed to disarm him. He then fled immediately. Police instantly linked the two incidents. Investigators urgently spread out in multiple directions, reviewing traffic cameras to track the suspect's movements. FBI agents were also mobilized to join the federal investigation due to the exceptionally serious nature of the case. At Lai Lai Ballroom, Brandon Say, 26, became the most critical witness because he had physically struggled with the suspect. Still shaken, Brandon provided the first descriptions to police. An older Asian man, about 1.78 meters tall, wearing a black leather jacket, a beanie, and glasses. Brandon and his family also pulled CCTV footage from the Lai Lai Ballroom lobby and turned it over to police. The video later clearly showed an armed man entering, Brandon Say rushing in to restrain him, and a fierce struggle before Brandon managed to take the weapon away. The gun recovered was a semi-automatic 9mm Mac 10 with an extended magazine. This type of weapon is illegal to possess in California because of its high lethality. Using the serial number on the gun, federal agents quickly traced its origin. The Mac 10 had been legally sold in the 1990s and was registered under the name Chen Yu-jin. Notably, the same name was also used to register the suspicious motorcycle found at the first scene. At the same time, based on camera images, law enforcement identified a white cargo van that the suspect used to escape. A region-wide alert was issued, instructing patrol units to locate the suspected vehicle. At around 10:20 a.m., on the 22nd of January, police found a matching white van parked in the lot of a shopping center in Torrance, about 30 kilometers from Monterey Park. As the SWAT team moved in, a sudden gunshot rang out from inside the van. Police pulled back to take cover, used an armored vehicle to secure the area around the van, and deployed a remote-controlled robot to observe the interior. Finally, when they forced the door open and stormed in, they found a man who had taken his own life with a gunshot to the head. The body was identified as Chen Yu-jin, 72 years old, matching the suspect description exactly. Inside the vehicle, police recovered a Norinco handgun registered under Chen Yu-jin's name, along with multiple pieces of evidence linking him to both dance hall crime scenes. And so, after nearly 14 hours of an intense manhunt, the county-wide search came to an end. A single perpetrator was identified, and there was no longer any further threat to the community. Even though the suspect was gone, the investigation could not stop. Search warrants were quickly issued for locations connected to Chen Yu-jin in order to piece together the full picture of the case. At the suspect's home in Hemet, about 130 kilometers from Monterey Park, police seized a .308 rifle, hundreds of large caliber rounds, and multiple electronic devices such as phones and computers. Most notably, they found tools and metal components that led authorities to suspect Chen Yu-jin had been attempting to manufacture a homemade suppressor for a firearm. With an elderly yet extremely dangerous individual like this, investigators needed to closely examine his background and criminal history to better understand him. Chen Yu-jin, 72 years old, was an Asian American citizen. Some information stated that he was born in China, while other reports suggested he had Vietnamese origins. It remains unclear which is accurate. What is known is that he immigrated to the United States around the 1980s, later worked as a long-haul truck driver, and ran a small transport company called Chen's Trucking Incorporated in the early 2000s, though the company dissolved in less than 2 years. Chen Yu-jin spent most of his life in the San Gabriel Valley area, home to a vibrant Chinese community. He had been married once but divorced long ago. In his later years, Chen Yu-jin lived alone in Hemet, in an old mobile home by a lake. Former acquaintances described him as hard to approach, quiet, and especially hot-tempered. Even so, no one had ever witnessed Chen Yu-jin acting violently or getting into fights before. They only recalled that he often held grudges over minor issues within the community. The only connection between Chen Yu-jin and the victims was the dance floor. He had frequently visited Star Ballroom and Lai Lai Ballroom for years, so much so that even the mayor of Monterey Park knew of him and confirmed that Chen Yu-jin was a regular at the dance venues. The suspect's profile was now fairly complete. The only missing piece was the motive behind Chen Yu-jin's actions. In the early days, countless theories were considered. The terrorism hypothesis was quickly ruled out because there were no signs the attack was linked to politics or ethnicity. A mental health explanation was also examined, especially after it became known that Chen Yu-jin had gone to the Hemet Police Department twice in early January of 2023 to report that his family was plotting to poison him. A Hemet desk officer later recalled that Chen Yujin had come in complaining that he had been scammed, robbed, and poisoned by relatives 10 to 20 years earlier, and said he would bring evidence but never returned. These paranoid behaviors raised suspicions that the perpetrator might have been suffering from late-life paranoid delusional disorder. On the other hand, more and more leads suggested the motive may have stemmed from a personal grudge within the dance community. Some witnesses told the media they had heard that Chen Yujin had issues with people at the dance halls. His ex-wife even shared that she had met him 20 years earlier at the very same Star Ballroom. At the time, Chen Yujin often taught dance for free to women who were new to the venue, and he offered to teach her as well. They married not long after, but the marriage lasted only a few years. Chen Yujin filed for divorce in 2005 and finalized it in 2006. His ex-wife described him as hot-tempered and irritable, though he had never been physically abusive toward her. Still, if she danced off beat, he would immediately lose his temper because he felt it made him look bad. This account painted the picture of a man with a strong ego and a fragile sense of social standing. A former tenant who rented from Chen Yujin in the late 2000s added that he trusted no one and always felt he was being bad-mouthed and opposed by people in the dance community. He often complained that dance instructors spoke poorly of him and expressed hostility toward them. It is possible that Chen Yujin teaching women for free at the venue upset some instructors there, creating simmering tension. Over time, Chen Yujin became increasingly isolated, showing up at the dance hall almost every night but befriending no one, constantly suspicious of others. In the period before the incident, there were rumors on WeChat that Chen Yujin was angry because a woman he knew attended a dance party without inviting him. It is possible that jealousy and a sense of exclusion pushed the man to the edge. After checking property records, police found that Chen Yujin had once owned a house in San Gabriel near Monterey Park, but sold it in 2013. After that, he mainly lived in the Hemet Lake senior community, appearing outwardly as a frail, lonely, and somewhat harmless elderly Asian man. The more investigators dug, the clearer the psychological profile became, a lonely, paranoid older man harboring resentment toward the community he once belonged to. Even so, concrete evidence of a specific motive remained thin because Chen Yujin left no note or statement before he died. His computer and phone were being analyzed by the FBI, but nothing significant initially stood out. Later, police discovered that Chen Yujin had sent a stack of documents to law enforcement shortly before the attack. The specific contents were not disclosed, only that the FBI was examining them for clues that might explain Chen's actions. Although the true motive behind Chen Yujin remains unknown, the Monterey Park Police Department, based on physical evidence and witness statements, was still able to partially reconstruct the perpetrator's timeline. In the weeks leading up to Lunar New Year of the Kui Mao year 2023, Chen Yujin lived quietly in Hemet, but his mind was in turmoil. He went to the police station to complain about old grievances, then stopped coming back, an indication of instability. Chen Yujin knew that Star Ballroom would hold a major celebration on Lunar New Year's Eve. Perhaps it was there that he had experienced deep emotional wounds, a failed marriage, friends drifting away, and a feeling of being humiliated by the community. Those dark memories resurfaced when he was not invited to the dance party. Instead of letting it go, Chen decided to invite himself in the most brutal way possible. On the afternoon of the 21st of January, Chen Yujin prepared his weapons. He carried a concealed handgun and a semi-automatic 9mm Mac 10. To be sure, Chen also fitted a homemade suppressor component likely to reduce noise and avoid drawing attention. He drove a white van from Hemet to the Monterey Park area. Chen Yujin arrived well before the party and left a motorcycle nearby as a backup escape plan if needed. As night fell, he sat in the van watching from a distance. Outside Star Ballroom, guests gradually came and went in growing numbers. Light spilled through the glass doors, revealing silhouettes of people dancing. Inside the van, the attacker quietly loaded a magazine into the Mac 10. At 8:20 p.m., Chen Yujin made his move. Wearing glasses and a beanie, he gripped the weapon and walked quickly toward the entrance. At that moment, Miss Mai Minan and her dance partner were leaving early. As her car backed out of the parking lot, she saw a man walking past, holding something metallic that glinted under the light. Ms. Nan froze, and a split second later, Chen raised the weapon toward her windshield and coldly pulled the trigger. The first shot shattered the windshield and struck Ms. Nan, killing her on the spot. Her dance partner beside her, terrified, threw the door open and ran for his life. The attacker did not chase him. Instead, he immediately moved toward his main target, Star Ballroom. Inside the dance hall, the music was still playing, but a few people near the entrance heard the strange bangs and turned around. They saw an unfamiliar man repeatedly squeezing the trigger. Flashes of light and deafening blasts plunged the scene into chaos within seconds. The first bursts tore through the crowd near the door, and at least 4 to 5 people collapsed. Chen Yujin stepped deeper onto the dance floor, moving as he fired throughout the room. He did not say a single word and did not appear to target anyone in particular. He simply coldly kept pulling the trigger until the magazine was empty. In that terrifying moment, Mr. Mingwei Ma disregarded the danger and rushed toward the suspect, trying to grab the barrel and force it upward. But at nearly 80 years old, he did not have the strength, and he was quickly brought down at close range. Chen Yujin then continued sweeping around the hall and stopped only when he ran out of ammunition. In total, about 42 shots were fired in less than a minute. Inside the room, the music had stopped. All that remained were the pained groans of the injured. Chen Yujin glanced around, took in what he had done, and quickly left. He got into the white van and drove away before police could arrive. But his plan did not end there. 17 minutes later, Chen Yujin appeared at Lai Lai Ballroom in Alhambra. There, a Lunar New Year dance was also taking place with several dozen guests. Carrying the Mac 10, Chen Yujin walked into the lobby. Behind the reception desk was Brandon Say, a 26-year-old who was managing the ballroom in place of his parents. Brandon had been listening for updates about the attack at Star Ballroom when he heard the door shut and the clinking sound of metal. Turning around, he saw a stranger holding a firearm right in front of him. Even as fear shook him, a powerful survival instinct pushed Brandon Say to take a desperate risk. He lunged straight at the suspect, grabbed the barrel of the weapon, and held on tightly. Chen Yujin was completely caught off guard. He stumbled backward, and a struggle erupted between him and Brandon. The two men, one old, one young, fought with all their strength. Brandon tried to restrain the suspect's arms while using his own body as a shield between the weapon and the dance hall behind him. Finally, after about half a minute of fierce grappling, Brandon yanked the gun out of Chen Yujin's hands. He stepped back, pointed the weapon back at the attacker, and shouted for him to leave. Behind his glasses, Chen Yujin's eyes flashed with fear. He knew he had lost the upper hand, so he fled out of the ballroom. Brandon did not chase him. He immediately locked the door, shouted for others to call the police, and collapsed into a seat, his hands still trembling from shock. After fleeing Lai Lai, Chen Yujin jumped into the van and sped off into the night. He was in extreme panic because his plan had gone off track, and he began thinking about destroying evidence. The van wandered through the night all the way to the Torrance area, more than 30 kilometers from the scenes. In the early hours of the 22nd of January, Chen stopped the van in a parking area near Hawthorne Boulevard and stayed inside for many hours. When a patrol unit happened to spot the vehicle and approached at around 10:20 a.m., Chen Yujin realized he had no way out. In one final moment of desperation, he took a Norinco handgun and ended his own life. At around 1 p.m., police confirmed that the person found dead inside the van was the suspect in the Monterey Park attack. A bloody chapter closed in chilling silence. The perpetrator chose death rather than facing court, leaving behind countless unanswered questions about what had been going on inside his mind. Because Chen Yujin died, the case ended without any criminal trial. However, the legal consequences did not stop there. In early 2025, exactly 2 years after the shooting, the victims' families collectively filed a civil lawsuit against the estate of Chen Yujin and the owner of Star Ballroom, the venue where the attack took place. The lawsuit alleged that the ballroom failed to provide adequate security and did not prevent an armed person from entering and killing guests. Therefore, the families sought damages and hoped to push ballrooms and nightclubs to improve security measures, such as installing metal detectors and hiring professional security guards. However, legal experts assessed that this civil suit was mainly about symbolic justice for the victims rather than material value, because nothing can make up for the emotional loss endured by the families of the 11 who died. By mid-2025, the civil proceedings were still in the early stages with no final ruling yet. Even so, the massacre also spurred changes in laws and policy discussions. Less than 1 month after the event, President Joe Biden praised Brandon Say as a true hero in the State of the Union address and invited him to attend as an honored guest. The image of a courageous Chinese-American young man who helped save dozens of lives became a symbol of hope amid tragedy. The president used that moment to urge Congress to revisit gun control laws, specifically emphasizing bans on assault-style weapons and large-capacity magazines like the one the attacker used. At the local level, Representative Judy Chu and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand introduced legislation aimed at strengthening enforcement of gun prohibitions for individuals showing dangerous warning signs. They hoped the law would help authorities remove firearms in time from unstable individuals like Chen Yu-jin before it was too late. On the evening of April 16, 2020, inside a house on Racquet Club Drive, two young men, Julian Talbot and Nha, along with a female friend, were preparing for a meeting with a client. At around 8 p.m., the girl decided to step outside for a while, leaving the two friends alone as they waited for the deal to take place. A few minutes later, when she returned to the house, the girl did not see the two men come to greet her as usual. The atmosphere was strangely silent. The front door was slightly open, the lights inside were still on, but everything was quiet. Feeling uneasy, she called out, but there was no response. She cautiously stepped inside to check, only to discover a horrifying scene. Downstairs, Julian and Anne were lying motionless, covered in blood on the floor. Empty bullet casings were scattered around them, and the sharp smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air. Fighting back her fear, the girl called 911. Her voice trembling, she told the dispatcher that someone had been shot inside the house. Shortly afterward, the Gwinnett County Police Department dispatched officers to the scene. When the red and blue lights of the patrol cars flashed outside, the girl nearly collapsed. The officers rushed into the house and told her to step back as they checked on the two victims. Despite their best efforts, the rapid response team quickly confirmed what she feared most. Julian Talbot and Nha were dead. Police immediately sealed off the house on Racquet Club Drive that same night. Outside, curious neighbors gathered behind the yellow tape, stunned by the news that two young men had been killed. Inside, investigators carefully documented every detail. The ground floor of the house was a spacious living area with a sofa, a coffee table, and a small table near the kitchen. On the floor, the two bodies lay close to each other. Julian had collapsed beside the sofa, while Anne was lying face down near the kitchen doorway. Both had multiple gunshot wounds, their clothes soaked red with blood and staining the floor. From the very first glance, the scale of violence was obvious from the number of shell casings scattered throughout the room. Investigators counted a total of 12 9mm shell casings spread around, matching the 12 shots that had been fired. Bullets had lodged into the wall and wooden cabinets, shattering a framed photo hanging on the wall. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle. Furniture was barely moved and little was broken, indicating the attack happened very quickly and without warning. On the coffee table, investigators noticed a small digital scale, several empty plastic bags, and a few strands of green plant residue. These were clear signs of leaves used to process stimulants. Their scent still faintly lingered in the room. This detail immediately raised the theory that the motive might be connected to drugs. It appeared the victims were acting as sellers, since they had a scale and product at the house. At the same time, according to the female friend's statement, the two victims had been preparing for an appointment. If so, the killer could have been the buyer. Had there been a dispute over money or the goods, or did the killer intend to rob them from the start? These theories were quickly placed at the center of the investigation. During the initial examination, the medical examiner determined that each victim had been hit multiple times. Julian was shot down with 6 wounds spanning from his chest to his abdomen. Nha was struck 5 to 6 times in the back and along his side. The wounds suggested the shots likely came from a position near the room's entrance, indicating the shooter fired while standing close to the ground floor entryway. He may have turned to leave after shooting Julian, but when he saw Anne still moving, he returned and fired additional rounds to finish him off. The cold, decisive nature of the shooting sent chills through investigators because the killer clearly intended to eliminate both men, not merely intimidate them. The possibility that the shooter was someone they knew was reduced because the female friend confirmed that the visitor that night was a client, not a close friend. Next, investigators interviewed neighbors that same night. A few people recalled hearing a car engine start and speed away at around 8 p.m., but no one saw clear details. Strangely, no one reported hearing gunshots. The scene showed standard 9mm casings, with no indication a suppressor was used. Perhaps the shots were fired quickly, and with neighbors indoors and doors shut, the sound was muffled. After collecting physical evidence, police sealed the area and transported the two victims' bodies for detailed autopsies. The investigation accelerated that same night, hoping to catch the killer before he could dispose of evidence or flee the area. Back at the police department, the investigative team immediately began looking into the backgrounds of the two victims to map out their circle of relationships and narrow the scope of the investigation. The first victim was Julian Thomas Talbot, born on September 25, 1999, and raised in Lawrenceville. He attended Brookwood High School. After graduating, Julian continued his college studies at Point University. Although the last name Talbot sounded very Western, Julian was in fact of Asian descent. People close to him shared that Julian had an optimistic spirit and always brought positive energy to those around him. And almost no one knew about Julian's involvement with stimulants. He also had no prior criminal record. The other victim was An Ha, 23 years old, who grew up in Grayson, Georgia, a small town near Lawrenceville with a large Vietnamese community. He graduated from Grayson High School and was remembered as loud and outspoken, yet deeply emotional and warm-hearted. With his outgoing nature, An made friends easily, including close younger friends like Julian. Many people called An the big brother because he always protected and helped friends whenever they needed him. Born into a Vietnamese family, An Ha was fluent in both English and Vietnamese. He helped his parents communicate within the local Vietnamese community and also blended comfortably into American culture. The brutal killing of two well-liked young men in the Asian community, especially with suspected ties to stimulants, left many people in shock. But considering the context at the time, it was possible that, in their youth and recklessness, they were trying to get rich quickly through an illegal path, chasing a huge payout for their own dreams. But who had so cruelly murdered the two young men? To begin answering that question, police examined the victims' phones. Typically, before a deal, the two sides communicate to set a time and place. Sure enough, after reviewing An Ha's and Julian's phones, police found a chain of messages discussing an illegal transaction. Among them was a message from an unknown number asking to buy 2 pounds of product and arranging to meet at the house on the evening of April 16th. However, at the scene, the 2-pound supply of leaves used to process the illegal substance was missing, further supporting a robbery motive. The sender's name was not saved in the contacts, but the messages showed that the buyer identified himself as Steven. Police immediately contacted the mobile carrier to determine who the unknown number belonged to. The result showed the number was registered to Stephen Than Tran, a 19-year-old living in Kennesaw, Cobb County. The name fit the theory that the buyer might be from the same Asian community. More importantly, when they ran his background, the system showed Stephen Tran was not a stranger to law enforcement. According to criminal records, in February 2019, Stephen Than Tran had been arrested for possession of illegal substances. However, because it was his first offense and the amount was small, he was placed in a pretrial diversion education program instead of serving jail time. Then, on April 6, 2020, just 10 days before the murders, Stephen was arrested again by Cobb County Police during a traffic stop. This time, officers once again found illegal substances in his vehicle. According to the arrest warrant, Stephen told police that he had planned to sell that stash to friends before he was caught. Even so, Stephen was held for only one night at the county jail and was released the next day after posting bail. This information stunned the Gwinnett investigative team. Stephen Tran not only matched the data of the buyer who had arranged to meet the victims, but he also had a recent drug-related record close to the time of the murders. The fact that a 19-year-old who had been out of jail for less than 10 days was now tied to a deadly robbery was infuriating. It raised the question, did Stephen's arrest on April 6th cause him to lose both his product and his money, pushing him to recklessly plan the robbery on April 16th to make up for his losses? With a plausible suspect identified, the Gwinnett County Police Department immediately coordinated with Cobb County Police to carry out an arrest plan. A search warrant and an emergency arrest warrant were approved by a Gwinnett judge overnight from the night of April 16th into the early morning of April 17th, 2020. In the early morning of April 17, 2020, a tactical team approached Stephen Tran's home address in the city of Kennesaw. According to records, he was living with relatives and might also possess firearms. This created a challenging situation for police. They needed to take him into custody without endangering anyone nearby. So, as the sun rose, officers quietly surrounded the house, sending a small group to ring the doorbell and ask the family to have Stephen come out to speak about the incident in Gwinnett. Surprisingly, Stephen did come out, perhaps believing police had not traced the case back to him and only wanted to ask questions. However, once they confirmed his identity, officers immediately restrained and handcuffed Stephen Than Tran. The arrest happened quickly and without significant resistance. The suspect was transported to the Gwinnett County Jail, where he was formally held without bond. At the same time, police searched Steven's residence in Kennesaw. Their goal was to find the weapon used, the stolen product, and any evidence linking him to the scene. The search recovered several key items. Inside the home, a 9mm handgun was found. Ballistics testing showed that rounds fired from this weapon had rifling marks that matched the bullets recovered from the victims' bodies. In addition, investigators found an amount of product close to 2 pounds, about 0.9 kilograms divided into bags. Next, on Steven's phone, police saw messages and call logs that matched the communications found on the victims' devices. This confirmed that Steven was the person who had texted Anh to arrange the purchase that night. With evidence this clear, there was no longer any doubt. Steven Thon Tran could be identified as the primary suspect, if not the shooter, then at the very least someone deeply involved in the murders on Racket Club Drive. What remained was to interrogate him. Faced with overwhelming evidence against him, Steven Tan Tran did not try to evade responsibility and quickly confessed. According to the case file, during questioning with investigators, Steven admitted to shooting Julian Talbot and Anh. At first, Steven claimed the plan to rob them had come to him suddenly. He contacted them to buy 2 pounds because he knew the victims had product at the house. When he arrived, he carried a weapon only for self-defense. However, during the transaction, greed took over, and Steven decided to snatch the product without paying. He described that after inspecting the goods, he pulled out the gun and threatened Julian and Anh to hand everything over. One of the 2 young men resisted, and Steven panicked and pulled the trigger. However, that explanation was quickly dismantled. Because if it were merely a panicked accident, there could not have been as many as 12 shots fired at the scene. Investigators believe Steven deliberately eliminated them to destroy witnesses and prevent the 2 men from surviving to testify. Steven did not clearly say who he shot first, only that after the gunfire, he saw both men lying still, grabbed the bag of product, and ran out to his car to escape. When pressed again on why he acted with such brutality, Steven lowered his head in silence and offered no convincing reason. He only confirmed that he acted alone and had no accomplices. After obtaining Steven's written confession, police completed the initial case file. From the clues and statements collected, police were able to successfully reconstruct the entire sequence of the crime. In early April 2020, 19-year-old Steven Tran was in a precarious situation. After barely escaping consequences in the 2019 drug case, he again got into trouble with the law on April 6th when he was caught with illegal product in his car. Although he was released after one night, Steven understood he was now on police radar, and more importantly, the seized product meant he had lost both his capital and his profit. The young man began to think he needed to quickly get product again to keep his operation going and also to have money to cover potential penalties. But how could he do that with no money left? From there, greed and dark intentions took root in the mind of this young criminal. If he could not buy product, then he would steal it fast. Through connections in that world, Steven learned about 2 young men doing small-time dealing in Lawrenceville. He sent probing messages and pretended to be a buyer. The killer contacted Anh and Julian, introduced himself as Steven, and acted like a serious customer. The 2 sides quickly agreed on a price, but Steven's insistence on meeting directly at the seller's house made Anh and Julian cautious. Steven reassured them by claiming he had previously done deals with their friend, and he even offered a more attractive price. After going back and forth, they set the transaction for the evening of Thursday, April 16th, 2020, at Julian's house. In the days before the meeting, Steven prepared in secret. He checked his 9mm handgun, loaded it fully, and made sure it functioned smoothly. With each passing day, the plan to rob them sank deeper in. Steven believed that a warning shot would be enough to scare the 2 men into handing over the product. But at the same time, he also mapped out the worst-case plan to wipe everything out if the sellers refused to cooperate. As for Julian and Anh, in those days they were excited because they were about to sell a fairly large amount of product. So they prepared carefully, cleaning the house, dividing the product into bags, and weighing everything precisely to avoid complaints about the amount. Julian even invited a close female friend to come over and help. They simply assumed the buyer was around their age and that it would be an easy, mutually beneficial deal. None of them anticipated the danger of letting a stranger into their home. At around 8 p.m. on April 16th, Steven Tran drove from Kennesaw toward Lawrenceville. After circling through the streets, Steven reached the neighborhood on Racket Club Drive. He parked in a concealed spot, turned off the engine, nervously checked his weapon, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. Inside, Julian and Ann saw the visitor arrive and invited him in. Julian's female friend had already stepped away as planned. Now, inside the room, there were only 3 men, Julian, Ann, and Steven. And placed the bag of product on the table for the buyer to inspect. Steven picked it up, sniffed it, glanced it over, praised the quality, and then reached into his bag as if to take out money. But what he pulled out instead was a fully loaded 9mm handgun, stunning Ann and Julian. The killer quickly aimed the weapon at them, shouting and demanding the product and money. Julian raised both hands, trying to negotiate. Ann, standing near the kitchen, tensed up. He understood the reality. Even if they handed everything over, the man could still shoot them to eliminate witnesses. In that split second, Ann signaled to Julian so they could act together, hoping to use their numbers to turn the situation around. But the two of them had likely underestimated how reckless and bloodthirsty the suspect was. The moment Julian lunged forward, Steven did not hesitate to pull the trigger. The first bullet struck Julian in the chest. Steven stepped back half a pace, the gun in his hand firing again. Several shots in quick succession tore into Julian, and the young man collapsed to the floor. In that instant, Nha turned and ran toward the stairway door, hoping to escape upstairs. But when Steven saw Ann running, he immediately swung the gun toward him and fired without mercy. Ann was shot in the back and staggered, collapsing right in front of the kitchen doorway. Steven walked closer and coldly fired several more rounds into the body on the floor to make sure the victim was dead. In total, 12 shots rang out until the room fell completely silent. When it was over, Steven was breathing hard. He looked around the room, 2 bodies lay motionless, blood spreading across the floor. No more cries for help, no witnesses. He had become a killer, but there was no time to freeze. He had to move fast. Steven grabbed the bag of product and then rummaged through the victims' wallets. Outside, it was fully dark, and the streets were quiet. Steven Tran rushed out of the house, clutching the bag tightly. He sprinted to where his car was parked, threw the bag onto the back seat, and started the engine. The car rolled out of the neighborhood and disappeared into the night. Steven drove straight back to Kennesaw. Even though it was far from a clean getaway, and he even brought the stolen items home, Steven naively believed police could not track him down quickly. But by the morning of April 17th, he was already caught. At that moment, he was still calmly eating breakfast when he heard police knocking at the door. Thinking they were only there to ask questions, Steven casually stepped outside, only to be restrained immediately. The teenage criminal's violent spree ended right there. Due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not until nearly 4 years after the crime that Steven Thanh Tran was brought to trial. In February 2024, the Gwinnett County Superior Court held the trial of Steven Thanh Tran on charges including 2 counts of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 3 counts of aggravated assault, and 1 count of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. In court, prosecutor Anthony Volkodov presented the case, emphasizing the defendant's brutality. The evidence was introduced piece by piece: the murder weapon, the recovered shell casings, the seized illegal product, and the phone containing the coordinating text messages. Witnesses were also called, including the woman who reported the crime and several neighbors. Next, investigators described how the case was solved, how they traced the phone number back to the defendant, carried out the arrest, and obtained his confession. They read aloud the passage in the report where Steven admitted to the killings, and the victims' families could not hide their outrage. Steven's defense team tried to reduce his culpability. His attorney argued that Steven committed the crime at a very young age, pointing to youthful pressure and mistakes, even noting that he had no prior record of violent offenses. In addition, the defendant had cooperated and confessed after his arrest. However, the prosecution strongly pushed back. They emphasized that Steven Thanh Tran had planned to kill in advance, given that he prepared a weapon and fired as many as 12 shots. During the trial, Steven Tran was also given a chance to speak. He looked pale and thinner after 4 years in custody and could only cry, clasping his hands as he apologized to the victims' families. But this only made Julian's and Anha's relatives even angrier. After hearing everything, the jury took only a short time to deliberate. With the facts and charges so clear, they quickly reached a unanimous decision. On February 9, 2024, the court found Steven Thanh Tran guilty on all counts. Judge Warren Davis harshly condemned the defendant's actions, calling it a senseless and cruel murder. He sentenced Steven Tan Tran to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 5 years. This meant the defendant had no realistic chance of parole or a reduced sentence and would spend the rest of his life behind bars. After hearing the sentence, the families of the 2 victims held each other and cried. They said that while the verdict could never make up for their loss, it at least ensured the killer would never again have the chance to harm others in society. As for Steven, he sat in stunned silence upon hearing that he would spend the remainder of his life in prison. When officers led him away, his legs buckled and police had to hold him up. At the age of 23, Steven Tan Tran's life was essentially over. He would begin a harsh prison existence, where each passing day would remind him of the horrific crime he committed that year. How do you feel about this case? Do you think the sentence was justified or too harsh for someone who committed the crime before turning 20, like Steven? Let Vietnamese Case Files know in the comments. And if you found today's story compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can keep following more gripping cases in the future. Goodbye, and see you next time.